Aloha, I'm reporter Blaze Lovell, and welcome to Civil Beats, Get to Know Your Candidate for Lieutenant Governor event series. Today we're sitting down with Ikaika Anderson. Thanks so much for coming with us today.
Mahalo for the opportunity.
Of course, of course. For those who are new to Civil Beat, we are a local nonprofit news site dedicated to providing local investigative news across the state. If you're looking for information on the candidates, check out Civil Beat's elections guide at civilbeat.org/Hawaii elections. Mahalo also to our event partner, Chaminade University, for supporting this Know Your Candidate event series and hosting us here in the Clarence T.C. Ching conference room. Tonight, we won't be taking any audience questions. We've collected a bunch of those ahead of time, so thank you for those of you who reached out to us with those questions. We've mixed those in with some of our own, and we only have an hour to get to know Ikaika, so we're going to jump right into them.
Let's go.
Ikaika, a lot of your experience has been at the city and county level as a councilman, as a staffer. What experience do you have working with statewide issues? Could you talk more about that for us?
That's a great question. My grandfather, Whitney Anderson, who raised me, served in the state legislature for 20 years, actually got elected to the legislature the year I was born. When I was in college, I worked my way through the state legislature in various staff positions to help support myself while I was in college. The final position I had in the state legislature actually was as a budget analyst in the House Finance Committee with Representative Dwight Takamine of Hawaii Island when he chaired the Finance Committee. So I know my way around the legislature's procedures, their policies, particularly how their money committees, both the Ways and Means Committee and the Finance Committee in both houses work with my background. And as you mentioned, I spent a number of years at Honolulu Rail. All total, I was at Honolulu Rail for 18 years, both as staff and as a council member.
That's interesting. I never knew you were a budget analyst in House Finance. What did that position teach you? What have you learned?
I learned to do your homework, especially to spend a lot of time making sure that all of your data is correct and accurate. Just being a little bit not correct would throw off all of your budget sheets. Mm-hmm. So I learned to ensure that we did our due diligence and had everything correct the first time. Otherwise, I saw other budget analysts who went through not having it all correct the first time, and they paid for that mistake with a lot of time.
Yeah. You've said that your first order of business as lieutenant governor would be to put the question of term limits at all levels of government out to the ballot, to the voters. The OG's office can't unilaterally make that kind of decision, though. Constitutional amendments that usually come out of the legislatures. How would you get the legislature to pass something like that, looking at term limits?
Well, the executive branch of government actually does propose a package of bills. And I would ask that the governor allow me as lieutenant governor to submit as part of the executive legislative package a constitutional amendment that would pose the question, should term limits for state legislators be exercised? Mm-hmm. The only way that you can change the state constitution is through constitutional amendment. And it's actually up to the voters to be able to change it or not. Now, I recognize that some legislators support term limits, many do not, but the Constitution belongs to all of the people of the state. Regardless of how any individual legislator feels, why not allow the people of the state to vote on the matter once and for all? I'd also add, every single county council, including the Honolulu City Council, have term limits. How did that happen? The individual county charters were amended by the voters to enact term limits. So every council member, or every council, through their council members, put the question on their respective ballots to their voters. That's the way this should be done. Let the voters decide once and for all.
Right, but lawmakers have introduced constitutional amendments, proposals before, and they never make it through the legislature. How would you get, this proposal through?
We had the same thing happen at the county councils, the city council in Honolulu as well for a number of years. And finally, I believe it was 1994 in Honolulu when it finally passed. So you're going to need some initiative. You're going to need people working together. I think if the lieutenant governor and the governor are on the same page working with the legislature to make this happen, that is possible. There also are a number of progressive state legislators who have gone on record saying that they would at least consider term limits. But really, it's not about how individual legislators feel. Let's ask the people once and for all what they want to do with their state constitution. Give them the right to vote. All legislators get to vote at the polls as well. They can vote however they want to vote, but don't stop people from having their say. When the county councils did it, people overwhelmingly voted for term limits. Overwhelmingly.
Similarly, you're calling for the legislature to subject itself to the Sunshine Law. How would you get lawmakers to do that? They've, you know, as you know, they've exempted themselves for a number of years.
With the challenges that the legislature has had over the past year or so, with their own ethical lapses, 2 state lawmakers who are now facing federal prison time, I believe it's time to open the process to be more transparent. That argument that, well, the legislature is different, we have to be able to operate in secrecy, just doesn't hold water. All of the councils have to abide by the Sunshine Law. All of our discussions have to take place in public when I was on the city council, and our votes had to take place in public. Why should the legislature be any different?
The councils, though, a few years ago, a state judge in the Office of Information Practices took the city council to task over sunshining items onto the agenda where you'd vote to have an item that wasn't originally on there. What do you think of that practice now? Was it okay then?
I can tell you exactly what happened. Council member Heidi Tsuneyoshi asked a chair of a particular council committee to put an item on his committee agenda because she felt that the item should be placed on the committee agenda. The chair of that council committee honored her request. And ultimately, there was a suit filed with the Office of Information Practices, and the Honolulu City Council lost that suit. That's what happened.
You're chair of the council
during
I was, that time.
And I left the decision to my committee chair at the time. As the Honolulu City Council chair, I gave great latitude to my committee chairs. I appointed them all, and I trusted them to run their committees as they saw fit. This chair decided to sunshine the matter onto the agenda in accordance with the Sunshine Law. Supermajority of the committee had to agree. Supermajority of the committee did agree, but the lawsuit found that the item was of significant importance to people in the city and county of Honolulu, and that city council committee lost their suit.
Okay, moving on to another topic, agriculture. It's been tossed around a lot this election. This question is from a reader. How do you intend to help small farms, young farmers, and new farmers?
As a Honolulu City Council member, I'm very familiar with the core services that government provides. Our core services at the county level are your police, your ambulance, your fire, your refuse pickup, those services that people depend upon for their everyday lives to live. I would like the state government to start treating agriculture as a core service. And what I mean by core service is government would provide some subsidies to our farmers in means of providing subsidies on their vehicular registration for those trucks and other vehicles that are utilized to take their crops and their livestock from farm to harvest, even those that are shipped out of state for processing and brought back, with the caveat that we would put into law that any of those subsidies that are given by government, there would have to be a substantial give back in the lowering of prices to the consumer, because those are ultimately tax dollars. So I'm having those discussions with my policy team as to exactly how that would work. I did have extensive conversations with both produce farmers and cattle farmers on Hawaii Island about doing just that, treating ag as a core government service. And there are people on Hawaii Island who are interested in doing that. Look forward to having that discussion across the state, but my policy team is interested in it.
You mentioned subsidies before. What specifically, what kind of government subsidies would you be looking for to help farmers?
We'd be looking at subsidies in the manner of some of the registration fees on some of the trucks. Of course, we'd have to work with the counties on that. Even talking with some of the shippers in the shipping industry in providing subsidies in manner of shipping of these goods. But again, if there were subsidies there, would have to be written into statute that the farmer provides some type of a reduction in pricing to local consumers at the back end, so that the consumer in return for their tax dollar subsidies gets something in return, and also helping the farmer to be able to make it. We'd even like to look at the terms of the leases on state agricultural properties and see how the state that may be able to work with the Department of Agriculture to be able to make agriculture more attractive and more financially feasible for the farmer on the state-owned lands. So our policy team is looking at that in addition to the treating of agriculture as a core service.
What about improving farming infrastructure, things like water lines and other things that farmers need to be able to grow crops or take care of livestock? A lot of farmers have called for more state investment into projects like those.
Be happy to look at more state investment into infrastructure. We're also going to have discussions with surrounding communities, because a lot of times when you have farms come into a community, you will have the community raise significant concerns. For example, on Hawaii Island, livestock operation that was going there also produced milk, I believe. The community was extremely concerned about wastewater and animal waste. And those concerns were huge for the community. And ultimately, those farms had some problems. So we're going to have to ensure that due diligence is done in reaching out to the communities. And although I envision the State Department of Agriculture, state initiative, taking the lead role, to get down to the community level and make sure that the communities are informed at the beginning of the process, I'd like to see our county council members, particularly on the neighbor islands, being brought into this discussion. No disrespect to our state lawmakers on the neighbor islands, but they spend a significant amount of their time here in Honolulu for 4 to 5 months of the year. They have to be here. January to May is when the legislative session is happening. Your neighbor island council members live in their respective communities all year long. And I can tell you, as I forged not only relationships, but friendships with a number of current and former county elected officials, those county elected officials know their communities extremely well. Let's involve them in these processes, even the state processes, to help to get community involvement.
You brought up an interesting point about community involvement, and I want to kind of turn things to that. And it's kind of like, how would you build, divides in your community? Like, for example, in your council district, there was this controversial housing project that came up in Kailua. If you were in charge of something like that, how would you have navigated things differently to avoid all this community opposition to projects like that?
If I were the developer, I would have approached the surrounding community first. I think that would have been key, to approach the surrounding community first. There were many residents in the surrounding immediate area who came out and said, we weren't made aware of this project. The developer didn't reach out to us right from the beginning. And it wasn't just a half a dozen or a dozen residents who shared that concern. There were many. So I believe that doing your due diligence when you're proposing a project, go out and talk to the immediate surrounding community first. Best way to do that, truthfully, is walking. Case in point, some years back, during my first term on the Honolulu City Council, my office found that the City and County of Honolulu owned a 10-acre parcel, zoned residential, R5, right next to Kalaheo High School in Kailua. And I thought that the property was vacant, zoned for residential. Let's look at it for housing. Rather than just go and hold a press conference and say, hey, I want to put housing here, I got my staff together, we printed flyers, we walked the community, knocked on every single door, invited people to a community meeting. We held 2, possibly even 3. The community was adamantly against it. Nonetheless, I told the community, understand you're against this, but it's a matter of policy. The land use here designation is residential. This calls for housing on this property. Let's at least take a look at it. The reason why I didn't pursue it wasn't the community opposition. It was when the soil samples came back saying that if we went forward as a city with development of that parcel, we risked undermining some of the foundations of the existing homes in the community. But my point here is, my office did our due diligence. We walked the community. We knocked on every single door prior to even coming forth with a proposal. That's how you do your community engagement.
Another question I want to ask you, since leaving the council, you become a caregiver for your grandparents. Watching them age, how has that changed your outlook on life or on politics? For my grandparents to be able to age at home, in their own home, means the world to them and to our family. My Keiki and I live right across the lawn from them. Just to give you a bit of an idea of our family compound, we live in a multi-generational household. The property was purchased back in the 40s by my grandfather's parents. So my grandparents live in my great-grandparents' former home on one side, and I live in my home on the other side of the property. So you go out my door, walk across the lawn,
and you're on my pops' porch. I keiki eat dinner with the great-grandparents every night. What's important is my children get to see their great-grandparents every single day. And my grandparents, their great-grandparents, have the benefit of spending time with the keiki every single day. It does wonders for both generations. And again, being able to see my grandparents age at home comfortably with their dignity and with their respect still intact it really means the world to me. It means the world to them, but also means the world to me knowing that they're okay and that they're happy.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if seeing all this and doing this, has it changed your outlook on, elder care in the state from a policy perspective?
It certainly has. I'm fortunate that I live right next door to my grandparents. My mother and my stepfather live about 10 to 15 minutes away from us, so they're also at our house quite often. We're fortunate, but many families don't have that close proximity of residential neighboring with their kupuna, which makes it more difficult. And there are some who have to take off of work. My mom has had to take off of work before. When I was on the Honolulu City Council, I had to take off work at times. So that can be difficult. Our policy team is looking at some of the initiatives that went before the legislature this past year. We'd like to explore the possibility of there being tax credits for those who have to take care of elderly family members and other incentives that would be available for people if they either need to take off of work, or some people have difficulty even being able to hold a job and care for their elderly parents. When I was on the Honolulu City Council, I was fortunate where I could set my calendar to be able to take care of my grandparents' needs. And I was also transitioning at the same time to becoming a single dad. But I got to set my calendar, and there was a lot of my calendar where I was able to do on the windward side because I represented Windward Oahu, and my grandparents live in Windward Oahu. So I could hold some of my meetings not too far from home, but not everybody has that ability.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to another topic that's been top of mind for a lot of people in the state, Honolulu Rail. You've been a staunch supporter of rail for quite some time, but you introduced a resolution a few years ago calling for an end to HART, the rail agency. Do you still think HART's the right agency to finish leading this rail development?
No, HART should be dissolved, in my personal opinion. But as I tried to explain to my colleagues, and I was the chair of the Honolulu City Council when I floated this resolution, what I tried to explain to my colleagues is it wasn't so much about what we as council members felt. Again, I'm going to go back to the fact that my personal feeling that the Honolulu City Charter, much like the state constitution, doesn't belong to the elected officials. It belongs to the people who are governed by it. So I asked my colleagues, regardless of your personal opinions, let's put the question on the ballot, and the 9 of us will go to the polls and vote how we want. We'll vote our conscience. But let's give our constituents the right to vote their conscience. And let's pass this through the council and ask the people if they feel that HART has outlived its purpose. Unfortunately, even as the council chair, I couldn't find the 6 votes that were necessary to pass that charter amendment. There were some very powerful special interest groups who asked me not even to put that charter amendment resolution on the council agenda to be discussed. I did anyway because I felt it was such an important item. And as a council chair, I couldn't even get the votes to pass it on first reading. But nonetheless, I felt that it was important enough to be discussed, regardless of the politics of it, what it would look like for a council chair not even being able to pass something on first reading. Wasn't interested in those optics at all. What I really felt was important was that the item be placed on a council agenda to be heard.
If I recall, the resolution called for rail responsibilities to go from HART to the Department of Transportation Services. Do you, I guess if you had it your way and you could decide who would lead rail construction, who would it be?
What that resolution would have done is dissolve HART, and then the management of rail construction would have gone under the city administration. I would envision that it would have went back to how rail started as part of the Department of Transportation Services in its own division called RTD, the Rapid Transit Division. So before HART came into existence, there is the Department of Transportation Services, and within the Department of Transportation Services was the Rapid Transit Division. But the Rapid Transit Division director was accountable to the Department of Transportation Services director, who is accountable to the council and the mayor. If your average citizen has an issue with HART, who are they going to call? The HART board chair, the HART executive director? I would venture to guess that most voters couldn't name a majority of the HART board members. And even if they were to call HART and try to speak with a board member, say the voter couldn't speak with HART, a board member, the executive director, what's their recourse? There is none.
If HART were to come to your office, or if you're elected, or the governor's office, if he or she is elected, asking for more money, more support from the state, would you give it to them?
First and foremost, I would advocate to the city council and the mayor to put that charter amendment question on the ballot, first and foremost with HART, to dissolve it. That would be my request, that we allow Honolulu's voters the opportunity to decide if HART has outlived its purpose. So that would be my first request. Now, I wouldn't actually go lobbying the council and the mayor. I would simply let them know that that's only fair, and at least to give it a hearing. Mm-hmm. Give it a hearing and let it go through the process.
But let's say HART still exists and they come to the state executive's office asking for more state support.
State support in terms of?
Money.
At this point, I think it's up to the city and county of Honolulu to determine exactly how they're going to manage rail. It's their project. They need to work with their partners in the Federal Transit Administration, their federal partners. I also want to ensure that HART, the Honolulu City Council, the mayor, that they're all working collaboratively, getting more of their monies released from the full funding grant agreement. Before I would even be able to have that conversation, I'd want to see exactly where the Transit Authority, the council, and the mayor's office are working with the Federal Transit Administration on the full funding grant agreement dollars. Those are still not forthcoming because there are still issues with the finances and the financial plan. So let's get all of that done first before we even talk about any additional money outside of whatever the council has under their current purview.
Okay. Earlier at the top, when you were talking about this HART resolution, you mentioned that you're being pressured from some powerful special interests. It's something you mentioned in one of your advertisements too. You say you face opposition from powerful special interests. Who are you talking about exactly?
Different powerful special interests with each issue. So going back to our discussion in talking about the resolution to dissolve HART, labor unions. I've received calls from a number of different labor unions, construction labor unions, who've chosen for whatever reason to support other candidates in the lieutenant governor's race, some of them, but they felt that HART should continue. I disagreed. Went forth with it anyway. In regards to what you're talking about with one of my TV ads, talking about the visitor industry, there were people who were making their money in the visitor industry who were saying that what I was proposing was too heavy-handed. Heavy-handed in terms of actually stopping all commercial activities at our parks and beaches in Windward, Oahu. No more permits. At some of our parks and beaches, the city was actually in the business of issuing permits for certain types of activities. I actually called for eliminating all of it. And there were people who made their money, substantial amounts of money, who wanted to continue to be able to operate via a permit system. But the permit system at that time just wasn't working. There were so many businesses who did have permits, say they could rent out windsurfing equipment with their permit. They would start renting out other types of watercraft, stand-up paddle boards, kayaks, outside of what their permits allowed. And then you had some folks who simply didn't bother getting a permit at all and would just set up shop in a beach parking lot and start offering whatever for rent, knowing full well that city ordinance at that time allowed for a 15-minute grace period to be able to drop your goods and get out of the park. So we felt, no, we're just going to stop it all and give a cooling off period. And to date, the Windward community has not been ready to have the conversation again of opening up our parks and beaches in Winter Oahu to permitting again for commercial activities.
And we'll get back to tourism in just a second, but one more question on this topic of special interest. You've actually gotten the support of a pretty powerful special interest, the construction industry, through its Super PAC B change. Now they've started running advertisements for you. If you are elected Lieutenant Governor, would you feel, beholden to, if the construction industry comes knocking, would you give them any special time or something you wouldn't give any other group that wouldn't have supported you?
Blaze, the way I'll answer that question is this way. The best way to try to determine somebody's future course of action, what it may be, is to look at their past courses of action. I'll go back to the Honolulu Authority for Rapid Transportation resolution that I introduced to dissolve HART. People asked me not to introduce it. People asked me, after I did introduce it, not to hear it. I did it anyway, and I brought it forth. To me, if it's the right thing to do, I'm going to do it. Similarly, with any endorsements that I receive now. If I'm at odds with anyone, I'll explain my position, I'll hear their position. But when all said and done, I'm going to do what I think is right. That's exactly what I did with introducing a resolution to dissolve HART. I felt that Honolulu's voters had the right to vote on the matter. So my past history has shown that I will do what I feel is right and be more than happy to explain the rationale and my reasoning for the decision.
So these new endorsements, they won't have any bearing on your decision-making going forward?
Just like anybody else. I'm always open to hear folks' positions. I'm also known for meeting with people who've openly opposed me. When I got elected to the Honolulu City Council, there were a number of community groups who had supported other candidates for Honolulu City Council. After I got elected, many of these folks asked to meet with me. My door was open to all of them. If I'm elected, it's my job to work with, to meet with, to represent everyone, whether they endorse me, whether they oppose me, whether they supported me or not. My job is to represent them. I was able to do that on the Honolulu City Council. I will be able to do that as Lieutenant Governor. I turn no one away.
Getting more into that, was there a moment in your life that you knew you wanted to get into politics? Could you point to like a specific thing happening? Was it a speech? Was it an event you were at? Did you hear something on TV? Was it a family member? What inspired you to first run for office?
Blaze, as I mentioned, I was raised by my grandparents, my mother's parents, my grandfather, Whitney Anderson, and my grandmother, Hanny Anderson. My grandfather, Whitney, was elected to the State House of Representatives in 1978, the year I was born. And in addition to being a state legislator, my pop and my grandmother owned a janitorial supply distributorship and a business, Condo Clean Hawaii, that cleaned condos and cleaned Les Murakami Baseball Stadium and a number of other outlets. But when I didn't have school and I had no babysitter or anyone else available to watch me, I would end up with my grandfather, oftentimes at the state capitol. And I got to see his interactions with people. My grandfather was never a policy wonk or one who took in-depth interest in policy, but he always had a soft spot in his heart for people. That's why he ran for elected office. He loves people. And as I saw him interact with people, that's when I decided that I would want to give public service a try. I was 12 years old, and I saw my grandfather working with people who elected him. But even before that, when I was a kid, one of my most vivid memories as a kid, we had a neighbor who lived on Keolu Drive, and late one evening, someone drove a car through their home. Luckily, no one was injured, but our neighbors had this huge hole in their house. And they called my grandfather to fix it. Usually you wouldn't call your state lawmaker for something like that, but they called my grandfather at home. His number was in the phone book. So my pop and my grandmother, when they got the call what the problem was, behind our house we had all this plywood that my grandmother kept. They loaded up a few pieces into their janitorial supply distributorship van, and we all drove down to their home, and my grandmother and my grandfather together took their plywood and nailed the hole shut until our neighbors could call a contractor to permanently fix it. But those types of interactions with people that my grandfather had is what really drove me to public service. My pop is 90 today, and he remains my best friend. I'm a Democrat, he's a Republican. He's been a Republican his entire life. I was raised in a very conservative household. When I decided to become a Democrat at 21 years of age, it was right after my grandfather left the state legislature. He told me, you know, I've raised you to have your own beliefs, to not follow lockstep with anyone, including me. If you feel the Democratic Party is more for you than the Republican Party, then God bless you. Don't expect me to join your party, though I'm happy where I'm at. So we still have great conversations. Our conversations usually center from him anyway on why I'm wrong, but I learn a lot from him. And as I said, you know, we're very close. He's still my best friend to this day.
Great. I just wanted to bring this up because we were talking about this before the event started. You said your pop puts a little bit of salt in his beer.
He does.
Why does it make it taste better?
He's done this forever. And I remember him doing this as a little kid. He and Calvin Say, they served together in the State House. There was a Japanese Okinawan restaurant they'd go to on College Walk. And my pop would have his Miller Lite poured into a glass, and he'd always put salt into it. It adds a bit more fizz to the top of the beer. And in the head of the beer sits the salt. And my pops insists it gives it a different taste. So I've tried it. I've since become a fan of it myself. But in any restaurant that my pop is known at, as soon as he sits down, before he even orders his meal, he'll get a glass, he'll get his Miller Lite, and he'll get his salt shaker.
I'm going to have to try the beer and salt routine after this. But
it's good stuff. It's good stuff.
The next topic, I promised we'd get back to tourism. You said you wanted to see a greater emphasis on business and convention travel. How do you think the state could attract more business travelers and more convention events?
First of all, the state can fix the convention center. First of all, we were flush with cash this year. We couldn't completely fix the convention center. Okay, that's first. We need to do that. Additionally, I believe we need to do more to market to the convention traveler, the business traveler. Oftentimes, so many business travelers are reluctant to travel to Hawaii when they have a business conference. They'll simply stay home, particularly government officials, because they get accused of coming on a junket. We need to do more to encourage people to come here. Our convention center is a gem. I've been to a number of events there. But I'd like to see us focus more on those. When I was on the Honolulu City Council, I was Honolulu's representative to the Hawaii State Association of Counties. In a nutshell, the Hawaii State Association of Counties is an organization that represents every single county council, Kauai, Honolulu, Maui, Hawaii Island. Each council has one representative to the executive committee. And the organization meets every single year on one island. I remember hosting the conference here in Honolulu in 2018. We hosted it at the Kioia properties between the Sheraton Waikiki and the Royal Hawaiian. We did fundraising. We were very successful in our fundraising. We had a number of folks from the business community statewide who attended our conference. But it got me to see that when you put your mind to it and you work at it, you can put on a solid conference in this state and get people to attend. I'd like to work with our state legislature as well as the Hawaii Tourism Authority, and should the contract hold, going to the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement for marketing, like to work with them as well. I must say that I am excited about the possibility of the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement with this new request for proposals that they've secured up to now, because I think that the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement will take a different approach. For too long, I think HTA has marketed to the masses looking at quantity of visitors. North of 10 million visitors is just too much for us to welcome here. We're going to foul the place up. Let's look at quality. And I think that's where an organization like the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, that is rooted in culture, that's rooted in the host culture, that is rooted in respect, in caring, in pono, we can start to change that paradigm. I'd like to give them a chance.
How could the state do that, though? Everybody talks about wanting less visitors here, but more quality visitors. How do you accomplish that?
Let's look at the type of visitors that we're marketing to. When you have some airlines in the past who were offering $250 round-trip tickets for people to come here, I would argue those aren't the visitors that we're looking for. Mm-hmm. I would also absolutely support visitor impact fees. Now, I understand there was a recent news article saying that there were a number of visitors who said they wouldn't come back because it's too expensive. I'm not certain if those are the type of visitors we're trying to attract anyway. There's also a story recently in the daily newspaper about opportunities on Kauai for ecotourism that are thriving. Let's look at those models. Mm-hmm. And together with the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, I believe there's solid opportunity to look at a different way. Again, the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement is an entirely different type of an organization. They look at culture, they look at practice, they look at conservation. Their purpose is just entirely different. And I'm excited to see exactly how this will work and what they'll propose, provided that this goes forward.
Mm-hmm. Back on convention travel, do you really think that conventions could make, supplant a significant portion of the tax revenue we would have otherwise gotten from, these mass numbers of tourists coming here?
Well, if you look at the numbers, we've also taken in less dollars with 10 million visitors than we did years ago with 9 million visitors. Why is that? So again, I think we need to look at the type of visitors that we are seeking to come here. Mm-hmm. And I will point back to what's happening on Kauai with ecotourism. Let's also take a look at that opportunity. Let's talk with the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement about those types of opportunities. Let's talk with some of the nonprofits who do these types of activities routinely for different opportunities. But going back to visitor impact fees, one of the leading candidates for governor is talking about visitor impact fees. We talked about that when I was Honolulu City Council chair, and we had a number of council members who were willing to support that. I think those are all solid initiatives. For the record, I would absolutely support visitor impact fees in this state. Yes, I would.
Where would you see that getting implemented, though? Would it be like, you step out of the airport and you get charged for something, or how would that show up in your, mind?
We would, I believe, be able to work with the airline industry to collect. We could work with the hotel industry to collect it. There's a number of ways to do this. Mm-hmm. Our policy team has even kicked around the possibility to raise money for education, implementing a alcoholic beverage fee we started with $0.25 per beverage that would be implemented in the Waikiki district on Oahu. And you look at some of the other resort zoned areas on the neighbor islands, South Maui in Maui County comes to mind, where those fees could be implemented to try to collect more monies for a purpose like education. So I believe there is opportunity to charge the visitor more. I don't believe somebody's not going to order another Corona or another Heineken or another Mai Tai because they don't want to pay a $0.25 surcharge. It's not going to happen. But let's look at every opportunity possible to ease the burden on the resident. That's what I'm talking about with the visitor industry. I'm not asking them to go away. I'm not asking them to stop doing what they're doing. But let's put emphasis on the resident. Let's not ask the resident to pay more to allow the industry to be here. Let's ask the visitor to pay more so that we can lessen the impact, financially at least, on our residents. Mm-hmm.
On the issue of the environment, I've seen that you've advocated for more tax credits for renewable energy projects. But my question is really about, infrastructure. What are we going to do about the roads that are sliding into the ocean, like up in Ka'ava and parts of Maui? A house on the North Shore just fell onto the beach. How are we going to deal with those threats to, our infrastructure?
In Ka'ava and around the Honolulu coast, the State Department of Transportation has, in fact, been working on stabilization of those roadways. With sea level change, with climate change and sea level rise, that's going to happen more often. I understand that. There may be also the need for state government to start through condemnation, taking private property, unfortunately, but I believe this is going to happen, taking private property to ensure that these roadways are still there. You brought up the point of that privately owned residents that had fallen into the ocean. on the North Shore. Unfortunate that that happened, but as Lieutenant Governor, under no circumstance would I advocate for hardening of residential shoreline areas, particularly those residences that have unpermitted seawalls. People, when you purchase a home, you need to do your due diligence as to where you're buying. There are enough studies that have been shared from Dr. Chip Fletcher and other experts in climate change and erosion that have shared when a private property owner hardens the shoreline in front of their property to protect their property, it's to the detriment of public property, the surrounding beaches. I don't believe it's ever okay. I don't believe it's ever okay for government to say, yes, this private property owner's rights to their property supersedes the rights of the general public, particularly if the private property owner does not have a permit. Now, it's easy to sit here and say that, I understand. Some folks may be wondering, sure, Ikaika, you say that sitting in a forum, if some of these property owners were to come and say this to you, you may be singing a different tune. No, I wouldn't be. We've actually had this discussion when I was on the Honolulu City Council, and a number of Windward Oahu property owners who were my constituents, I'll put it mildly, they were a bit upset with my standpoint on that. I held to it. I just don't believe that any private property owner right to property should be to the detriment of the general public for policy.
For those, property owners who, as you mentioned earlier, their houses or their properties might have to be condemned to make way for a roadway. Do you think that they should be compensated by the state for losing their
Absolutely.
Home?
Absolutely. The way that the condemnation process works, the property is condemned by government. There's a process where fair market value is determined and the private property owner is compensated at fair market value. Government doesn't just simply take the property and there's no compensation whatsoever given to the owner. That's not the process. So yes, the private property owner would be compensated at fair market value, but the fair market value is determined by both the private property owner and government coming together and mediating that, oftentimes in court.
What about areas like downtown Honolulu and Waikiki, places you can't exactly just pick everything up and move it? Well, how would you go about managing those areas?
That's a fair question. Our resort districts, I believe we have to keep, because those are the areas where our state makes its money and that's how we pay our bills. If Waikiki goes away, South Maui goes away, parts of Kauai that are resort go away, the state can't pay its bills. Education, healthcare, county services, police, fire, ambulance are now going to have to be borne by all of us who live here. So in the resort areas, we're going to have to do everything we can to combat climate change. And during my time on the Honolulu City Council, we talked about a number of policy initiatives that we actually implemented. Sea groins in Waikiki, controversial as they may have been implemented. Not as productive as I would have liked to have seen, but we still have the shoreline. We've still been able to make some progress. But I would rather go the route of groins than erecting new seawalls and even hardening the existing walls. From what I've seen and from what I've read from some of the studies that have been put together, the groins are more friendly, if you will, to the environment. But we can't afford to lose Waikiki. We as a state can't afford to lose South Maui, North Kauai, parts of Kona on the Big Island. Otherwise, again, the question is, how do we pay our bills?
Right. Moving on to another topic real quickly. It's about the LG's relationship with the governor. As you know, not all lieutenant governors have gotten along with their governor. How would you handle disagreements with whoever is elected governor if you were to win office?
These policy initiatives that we've discussed, I fully realize, as a lieutenant governor, I will only get the opportunity to work on any of these if the governor will trust me and give me that opportunity. I had a conversation with Governor Wahe about how to form a productive working relationship with the governor. And Governor Wahe told me, he said, Ikaika, the relationship being a good one between the governor and the lieutenant governor, is 95% contingent upon the lieutenant governor proving two things to the governor. One, that you're trustworthy. Two, that you're competent. He said, because if you're neither of those or one or the other, but not the other, he said, you're going to be sitting in your office with nothing to do. So I fully realize that the governor is the starting quarterback. For my 11 and a half years, of the 11 and a half years I spent on the city council, for 6 years, I was a vice chair of the council, serving in a supporting role to the council chair. I'm very accustomed to not being the starting quarterback on the team. I was the starting running back on the team. I complimented the council chair, helped the council chair carry forth the city council's policy initiatives, transit-oriented development, homeless shelters, homeless services, property tax credits for the elderly. These were all things that I helped carry forth as the council vice chair. So as the lieutenant governor, it would be my job to compliment the governor. We're going to have disagreements. That's true. It's expected. It's going to happen. I would do everything within my power to have those disagreements privately and not in public. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it's the governor's policy initiatives that get advanced. What I would work on with the governor is sharing the different levels of expertise that I've had as a council member and as the council chair. Not talking about what I'd like to do, but talking about the successes that our team has had over the years, and asking the governor for my team to have the opportunity to duplicate those successes across the state. That would be the ask. Mm-hmm. And again, I stress ask, request, compromise, because without the commitment of the governor, all of these initiatives that I'd like to work on would have no chance of coming to fruition.
Is there a governor candidate you prefer right now?
Honestly, no. I'm personal friends with Dr. Josh Green. He's offered, as a personal friend, medical advice to me, also to my former spouse, that have been very helpful. So my relationship with Dr. Green has been as a personal friend and even as a doctor, not so much as a policymaker. I've gotten to see Josh Green as a human being. I've also been personal friends with Ikaika, the person, not the state senator, not the congressman, not the pilot, but Kai, the brother from Miloli'i, who was raised in the fishing village. While I don't have a relationship with Vicky Cayetano, the Anderson family does have existing relationship with Governor Cayetano. Both my grandfather and my uncle served in the legislature with Ben Cayetano, and we've got a lot of aloha and respect for the Cayetano family. So for me to support any of these candidates would amount to supporting one friend over another. I'd also point out, to the best of my knowledge, all three of the major candidates for governor are running their own races and watching to see what happens in the lieutenant governor's race. I'm going to do the same, to be fair.
On COVID, do you agree with how the governor and the lieutenant governor handled the pandemic?
Many of the mandates that Governor Ige put forth were controversial and upset people. But I will commend Governor Ige for the mandates that he proposed, and I'll also commend Governor Ige for keeping the people of Hawaii safe. He took much criticism for his mandates and for insisting on them. But he did so because he genuinely felt in his heart that the mandates would keep our people safe. And if you look at the numbers from the beginning of the pandemic, by and large, Hawaii's numbers were amongst the lowest in the country when you looked at numbers, when you looked at hospitalizations. Lieutenant Governor Green, I felt, did an admirable job, beyond an admirable job, in communicating to people in terms that we could all understand what was going on. How diseases or how viruses work, how they're communicable, how people can protect themselves against viruses, explained hand washing to the point of rolling up his sleeves and turning on a sink and washing his hands. The governor and the lieutenant governor did everything possible to try to explain to people in the clearest terms so that they could understand what was going on and why the mandates were necessary. The only real concern that I have is sometimes the mandates weren't always clear and sometimes not always consistent. That's the only concern that I really had. But both the governor and the lieutenant governor went out of their way to justify the mandates and to explain to people why they were necessary.
If you were LG for the last 4 years, is there anything you would have done differently?
If I was lieutenant governor for the last 4 years, I can't say that there's anything particularly in style that I would have done differently. If I were a doctor, as Dr. Green is, I likely would have hoped that I would have been the point person for COVID earlier, is all. Mm-hmm. I think there was a golden opportunity to make the doctor in the administration, and there's only one elected doctor in the administration, the point person early. If I were that doctor, I may have asked for that. Mm-hmm. But again, I can't commend the governor and the lieutenant governor enough for their mandates, for explaining their mandates, and from Dr. Green's standpoint, in explaining to people how diseases work, how viruses work, and the importance of washing your hands and how to do all of that properly. I think that really helped people to understand why the mandates were there, even if people didn't agree.
COVID helped to highlight a lot of Hawaii's longstanding issues, especially in our educational system. And you've said that you've talked about wanting to see a shift in the DOE. You want to see more local control. What exactly are you looking for, and how would you go about getting that done?
Well, when COVID happened in early 2020, as chair of the Honolulu City Council, I made the decision to close the council. The Honolulu City Council is a legislative branch of the city and county of Honolulu that represents 1 million people. We were one of the first, if not the first, branch of government to close. And I made that decision at 8 o'clock one morning as we were about to start our budget briefings. Our city council chamber was packed with all of Mayor Caldwell's department heads who were about to give us our briefings. I went to see Mayor Caldwell at 8:30, a half hour after I informed my staff of my decision to inform the mayor. And his administration warned me, Ikaika, tread slowly, move cautiously. You don't want to do this quickly. I said, I'm not here to ask for your permission, your guidance. I'm here to give you a courtesy. This is what we're doing. And the mayor informed me, Ikaika, let me remind you, all my department heads are in your chambers. They're going to be briefing you soon. I said, no, they're not today. Now, keep in mind, the state sunshine law wasn't set up to allow us to meet remotely. The council rules didn't allow us to meet remotely. And when that was reminded, when I was reminded of those facts, I told the mayor, if I'm sued, your corporation council is going to represent me. I'm going to represent the city council.
Sorry to interrupt you, but the question was about the educational system, the DOE. You've talked about wanting more local control. How do you get that? How do you get more control at the local level in the Department of Education?
To get more control, again, the same thing. You have your elected officials work directly with the Department of Education. In my instance, I worked directly with Mayor Caldwell. Mayor Caldwell ultimately followed suit of the City Council and started closing. With the Department of Education, the leadership starts at the top with the governor, the lieutenant governor working with the superintendent, and making the recommendations and moving forward with the mandates accordingly. But I think that needs to happen with the elected officials first, and they need to be absolutely intimately involved with the process. The elected officials need to be involved with the process.
There's been a lot of talk about corruption this year, with a lot of charges being brought by the federal agencies, but what does corruption mean to you?
How would I combat it?
No, just what does corruption mean to you? When you hear the word corruption, what does that mean to you?
When I hear the word corruption, it means dishonesty. It means people who have abused their position of trust, their position that people have given them, that they've abused it for their personal gain. That's what corruption means to me. And oftentimes it's happened when people have been in the same elected office for too long. That's part of the reason why I support term limits. I just don't think an incumbent should have the power of incumbency for an indefinite amount of time. And let's look at the legislature. The legislature had a golden opportunity last year to confiscate, to take away a convicted felon's pension. What did the legislature do? Well, the House of Representatives started a bill to take away the entire pension of a convicted felon. Then the measure goes to the state Senate. The state Senate amends it to say, no, we're going to let the convicted felon keep half of the pension. And the state House then decides to agree, without even going to conference committee, to the state Senate's amendment. Now you have one member of the state legislature running for lieutenant governor who is saying, well, that was an action we had to take. No, it wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. And she voted on the House floor to only take half a pension. To me, either you're going to take the person's pension or you're not. You either condone awarding a pension to a convicted felon, or you believe they should lose their entire pension. There's no two ways about it. I feel that we need to get tough with people who abuse their public trust. You abuse your public trust, you lose your pension, you lose your health benefits, you lose anything that the public has given you if you breach their trust. Mm-hmm. As lieutenant governor, I want to work with the next governor to get that done.
We're coming up on the hour mark, but Ikaika, just one last question for you. I saw when I was preparing for this event, I was going through old news clips of yours, and I saw that you paddled, right, for Kamehameha?
I did.
Back in the day. Did you do long distance or regatta?
I did regatta paddling as a kid. I started paddling at 8 years old. We raced against 12-year-olds. It was pretty brutal. I practically went backwards. I never did the Molokai Ihoi, but in high school, I raced distance. Our race course started at 3 miles in the beginning of the season and ended at 6 miles. So did some distance paddling. Canoe paddling is our state sport. Hawaiian outrigger canoe racing is the official state sport of the state of Hawaii, and was honored to be able to participate in it.
What seat did you sit in?
I was a stroke at times. I sat number 2 at times, and I also steered at times. When I first started paddling, I was the smallest kid on the crew. And when you're first learning to steer, you don't paddle all that much. Only the most skilled steersmen can paddle. So my coach figured, let the skinny kids sit in the back and poke out the whole time, let the big kids pull them along.
Just real quick, what was your hardest race you could remember?
Canoe paddling wise?
Yeah.
The hardest race canoe paddling wise undoubtedly was the race from Magic Island to John Dominus down to the natatorium and back, because you never knew what the conditions were going to be outside Kewalo Basin. Could be flat today in the morning, and then when we start the canoe race, you got 5-foot swells. So it varies. Mm-hmm. So that was definitely my most challenging course. Practically open ocean.
My mom's a steersman, so I had to fit in a paddling question somewhere in here. Hi, Mom!
Your mom's a steersman?
She is.
Toughest job in the boat.
As she tells me. But Ikaika, thanks so much for joining us here tonight. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And for our audience here and those watching online, we will have 3 more of these candidate Get to Know Your Candidate events for the lieutenant governor's positions. Up next is Sylvia Luke on Wednesday, Sherry Manoa McNamara on Thursday, and Keith Amamiya next Monday, all at 6 p.m. Ballots will be out soon, so the Civil Beats election guide is a great place to find all of our candidate Q&As. We asked them questions. They answered a lot of them. It's been a great resource for people in past elections. It gives you a good resource on all the candidates that are running in the elections this year. And you can find that again at civilbeat.org/Hawaii elections. Mahalo to our supporters and everyone who joined us live here at Chaminade University and online. We hope you have a great night. Ahui ho.
Mahalo Civil Beat for the opportunity. Appreciate it.